Thank you, Debbie. And I'd like to invite up to moderate this Q&A Dr. Theresa Lopez Castro, assistant professor from City College, staff member at the Center for Optimal Living, and member of the executive committee of the Division on Addictions.
Thank you, Richard. So good morning. We've had an incredible morning of 4 presenters, and we've got about 10 minutes before lunch. Just one final reminder that if you are getting CE credits, that you sign out, and then when you come back from lunch, sign in again. So there are microphones on both sides, and please, let's get this started. Who would like to begin? Yes.
Yeah, hi. Michael Beck, Addiction Institute. For Dr. Rothschild, I hope you could elaborate on when you are in the room with someone and they're lying through their teeth, and how you would go about suggestion on exploring that with them.
How do I know they're lying?
No. What do you do to explore it with them?
No, but I'm asking, how do I know they're lying?
How about a positive toxicology versus what they're saying?
Okay, I would probably say, gee, that's really interesting. I'm sorry, I'd probably say that's really interesting that you're saying that, because you had a positive tox screen, so I'm wondering what's going on that you feel that you can't tell me about this, and I'm really curious what you think is happening here. What do you think would happen if you told me? And I would be curious. I mean, I really would. I would just sort of wonder about it. Are you aware that you had a positive tox screen? And if they would say, yeah, it was a mistake, I'd say, that's, wow, that must feel awful. What's going on? And what if it was really positive? What would there be a reason maybe that you might not want to be telling me? Sort of wonder about it.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Does that help?
Actually, can I ask you, were you okay with that answer?
Yeah, I wondered.
No.
Okay.
That's okay.
What would you say? What would you do? What would you like?
Well, I do that. It seemed like you had something with more depth.
I wish. Well, it would depend I can't, because I don't know what they would say then. So, we could role play it with various particular answers, but I would start there, and then I would have to respond to whatever it is that the patient was saying.
Why don't you role play?
Which I think is harder to. We can, but I don't want to take them away. Ross, yeah.
First, I'd like to thank the panel for a very rich spread of presentations. But I've been struck since Andrew started this morning about a couple of things he said, and I would like to address. We're talking about harm reduction, but there's been such a great focus on substance abuse. I'm wondering if we could just shift a little bit to what may be the next frontier for psychologists, and that's the area of domestic violence. You've touched on it a little bit there. We've moved from the keep it simple, stupid to complexities. That's what we're here about. And in New York State has adopted a Minnesota model of domestic violence that says that the perpetrator, and it's usually the male batterer they're talking about, has only one issue. He has the issue of entitlement. And if you just address the entitlement, then that will take care of the problem. However, perpetrators keep recidivizing, if that's a word, and the same approach that we've done with substance abuse, going from the one-size-fits-all to the complexities you've all addressed today, we need to do the same thing with the perpetrators of domestic violence. The Minnesota model implies that there's no psychological underpinnings to this behavior, and that you just have to tell people you can't do that anymore. And there's been a lot of resistance in New York State, at least through the funded programs that are providing input to batterers, that it's strictly education. They don't want to do treatment. And I think the skills that we have, that we've developed and expanded into substance use, need to be directed toward domestic violence in the future. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you all for all your insights today. It's been great. Just wanted to follow up on the guy from Addiction Institute about a patient I have that I'm struggling with who has been lying and actually has come high to the sessions. And so I actually am in supervision about this, and one thing we decided to do is just to take all of the using off the table and try to get at the underlying self-loathing that's going on. And that, too, has been difficult. We're really still in the alliance phase, like developing the alliance. It's just taking a really long time. He is, young, but he's been using for about 8 years, IV drug use, actually everything. So I find myself tiptoeing around the elephant in the room. I find myself, like when he comes in, my policy is if you come in high, I really don't think we should do the session. I don't know how you guys feel about that. And I have sent him away. But he uses, comes in high. And so what I find, my countertransference about that is like I'm constantly finding myself really angry. And like, you're messing with me, man. I know what you're doing. Come on, can't you just be honest with me? And I feel like I'm really struggling with this. So I'd love to hear.
I actually had a section that I took out because of time on when patients come in high. And I don't do what you do. I actually welcome it as a chance to show me that part of yourself. And I appreciate that you're bringing that part of yourself to me. And I will talk about it that way as sort of, hopefully they'll come in sober another time. But I don't send people away. I'll acknowledge it. I'll say you look like you're high.
I've done that as well.
Yeah.
And he will. The one time when I did acknowledge and said I think we should not have the session, he was so full of shame and so full of apology, and it's like he wanted to make it up to me. I think there's a maternal transference going on here, but I just also my anger about it. I feel like I need to work on that.
Yeah, I understand because I think what you're feeling is well, first of all, shame. It makes us angry. And I think very frequently when we feel like we can't help our patients, we feel shame. I know I do. And we're sharing the shame with our patient. It's a countertransference. It's an enactment. It's a projective identification, right? And it makes us really angry to feel shamed. And I think all you can do is really acknowledge that. It's the helplessness. But I would talk about it with the patient. And as you said, you're at the early stages. You're going to look back on this time with this patient. The thing you can do now is to keep this patient in treatment and to build an alliance and to have the patient feel fully accepted. I think, it's a long-term prospect. But
yeah, I just want to, well, I don't know if maybe I'm just going to echo what you just said. How long does it take for a traumatized patient who's been multiply traumatized as a child, and then in treatment, and then by parents that kicked him out, and then by doctors who were disgusted by the scabs on his arm from injecting drugs, to feel safe disclosing something that he feels most ashamed and vulnerable about? How long does that take? And so this idea that we know that the patient is lying to us, or that we have expectations about what the patient should be doing, I think is the worst. I mean that Bion says that the most dangerous countertransference interference is the therapist's agenda or the therapist's theory. So why is it so difficult to sit with your distress at being in that situation where it seems that the patient is lying, but the patient is not willing to own it? And as I think that these folks have been talking about, what we're experiencing must have something to do with the powerlessness that the patient feels around that, what's going on for them. So to what extent, as we sit to tolerate the distress of being in that situation, are we actually then communicating something to the patient that helps the patient grow? So there's the trust, the alliance, and the capacity to tolerate distress, which is all going on in the process. That's one thing. But the other thing I do want to really echo and reinforce is that when patients come in intoxicated, it's a wonderful thing. If we consider what many of us have been talking about is that aspects of the self are expressed and kind of wrapped up with their using, and it may be wrapped up with their active using. And when they bring that into the room, it gives us an opportunity to speak to it directly. Not just can you bring the part of yourself, that was out on Saturday night into the room, but can we actually engage that part? Now, let me say one other thing, and is that it really depends on why the patient is coming in intoxicated as well. What is the patient? If we consider that active substance use is a communication, what's being communicated? We heard Rebecca talking about that dark, enraged part of that patient that she actually brought into the room so that Rebecca could meet her. What if it is the only way that the patient can say, I am completely out of control and I'm on the verge of death and I need you to take charge and do something. If we ask the patient not to come, or what if they were so suicidal that they had to get loaded to come to the session? I would say, I am so glad that you got loaded today rather than killing yourself. Really, I am so glad. And now can we talk about, why you were in such distress?
And actually, Andrew, because we are out of time and there's pent up, and I realize we have a couple more questions. We can probably take 2 more questions before we wrap up for lunch. So
I just want to quickly say also, the way we're talking about lying, let's just be careful when we use the word, because it's so pejorative and blaming. And it might be something disowned, it might be something dissociated, it might be something that is so covered by shame it feels unspeakable. Lying is a kind of a dangerous term, so let's think about what we're saying when we say lying, what our patients not owning or not saying.
I just had a comment and a question for Dr. Block or for anybody. When you're talking about your young woman and the dinner table incident and how she just went to the table and said, I'm sick, deal with it, I also had a reaction to that she might have been talking about her substance use and saying to her family, I have this problem, deal with it.
Yes, maybe to me too, and there were, there was a lot that I couldn't talk about with respect to that case, but her parents too disregarded her substance use on a number of occasions. They'd have these big family parties and she would get completely drunk, and parents never said a word about it, so it was acceptable. So I think in every case, I think there are just multiple layers of meaning that go on, some of which as clinicians we can catch in the moment, some we get to find out about later in supervision, some I think sometimes that we have a sense of that never get articulated just because there is so much information, because it's this full, interesting, complex human being who's sitting in front of us.
And the other thing, you had said sometimes you get this feeling of, am I responsible? Mm-hmm. So when you look at things like regulatory boards, insurance, value-based reimbursement, we're also getting the message that we are responsible at a certain point if we don't refer or almost insist on higher levels of care. And I don't know how that's just perhaps an industry-wide problem, but there really is a sense where you are all but being told, you're responsible, it's your license. If this person doesn't go to detox and something happens to them, you're going to be held liable for it.
Yeah. And one last question from this side.
Yeah. Thank you. Great presentations. This was touched on, and I think it's a wonderful point, and I just want to ask about it a little bit more deeply. There's general agreement that it's not effective to engage in argument or to reprimand the patient for their use or try to, battle with them about change. But it's such a frequent countertransference that we experience in treatment. I want to pose the question, maybe it's most easily addressed from a relational perspective, but I'm interested in from any perspective. How might the countertransference, the impulse to argue, to be combative, to judge, be brought into the room in a safe way that's not reprimanding, that's not arguing, but maybe exploring that transference with the patient in the therapeutic process, and maybe even, looking at the ways that the patient has seen that repeatedly throughout their lives, societally and from their families, and et cetera.
Sometimes I've said, I'm really having an urge to say to you, blah, blah, blah right now.
And maybe a la Weiss and Sampson, it's the transference test. That is, you say that you care for me, so I'm going to be a pain in the fucking ass, and I'm going to, really, and see how you handle it, because my dad beat the crap out of me. So that our capacity to contain it and process it in that way, as Rebecca was suggesting, lets us know something about the patient's earlier object relations and to transform it. And it can happen both in interpretation but also in the implicit process of being able to contain the feeling.
And we've been talking about thinking and being curious, and now I'd like everyone to act and go get some lunch. See you back here at 1:45.